알아서 디버샤피 리우 단 저기 다디기 두야리아 아니 저기 동아여기 디 규디 가르친 디바디기 지고레스 자다는 저 디바디 동아디 미디어 바인자 다 동아 세고 딩에 세바다 디바디 샤고레 제레 자산 디바 샤바텔라다 님바 지게 삼로 따위에 도하는 저기 샤타디 간에 매바 쇠데 간에 수고레스네 어 삼로 따제 매바 수고레스 지자다 삼로 간에 따지 매바 수고레스네 님보 뜻이 삼 따진 도신 매바 수고레제 님보 뜻이디 저기 그세 네 순진비 돕세다 된예발 라미도 비 돕세 띵이 돕세다 님비 돕세다 치 유베나네 다 그생각다 님비 돕지 그 디고 쉬고래 자다는 님비 돕이다 도스크지 네마들 가르슈버라나 지상아주 지게 네디게 타마베 가지고 류게 나자다 디네스 지 나자 춤바이나 멤버티 네 멤비기 랍지가바 나신 제네 냠솔렌제 멘디기 비슈 다장을 두신 네데 자고도 와스 어디나시 땅아줄이야 디파세당 동안용가 개와 침바당 안로다 되니게 동안용의 규디가레스네 네디 되샤시다 디몰라 소바데 수기레스 지산디 담야바소 고레스 다디 мя바소야라 카르코 수고스네 다디기 메네 디мя바소야기 멘디다 상유점된디기 냠len 이름바 손셰비기 아니 냠len 제드레스 지산디 님보 뇨모베 님보 아니 제게 추심 손야라 소바당 안조 담야보도 비시라 검제 아니 님보디 텐제나는 아주 콤바이나 디바디 메바차고레스 아니 운도시네 샤고레스 그생각도 디고시로와
Good evening. So all of us want to experience lasting happiness, a happiness that is freed from all problems and difficulties. But whilst this is the case, we still encounter so many unwanted situations, problems, suffering, difficulties, and so forth. And all of these come about independent on the non-virtuous karmic imprints that we ourselves have accumulated in the past. So these then we need to purify. And how to do so? Through cultivating and opposing a contrary way of thinking. And this is expressed in particular through the four opponent powers. The opponent powers of firstly regret, restraint, reliance, and the antidote. And in this presentation, we are now in the fourth of those, that of the power, the antidote. And last week, in the verses we looked at, one of the illustrations presented was just like when we have physical illness. We seek out the advice of a skilled physician. After being examined, we then receive medical prescription, and that is something that we then follow closely so as to heal from our ailment. So to here, when our mind is so afflicted by ignorance, anger, attachments, and so forth, we need to seek out and follow the advice of the Buddha, in particular that of ethical restraint and the wisdom realizing emptiness.
아니 niki nga zuki nyumomba mewa suyadi nyingbo ten komji komyadi da nyingbo suyadi men nashinji dadi sanyu chumnendiki nga zuki songshebi nyam jiga lam nyamlegi rinpa tamyaba tobeki dawa suyadi dile shenbeki da nyingbo di nyumomba mewa suyaki sabona jeba mewa suy nyingbo di dile shenba ji yomares jisan dile shenba di chokawa ne zewe ne dile labaji rayo mare dile labaji da tenbege zugi dunga se digiru tenba mangbo yobaine sanyu chimnen digi nyomombe nyembo dameba to be shera komgure se be dameba to be shera dile labege nyembo ji kawane zebine sule ana su nye yo ma su gangi she yo mare sa dile labaji yo mare sa songore.
Furthermore, we looked at last week how amongst the various antidotes, the antidotes to our mental afflictions are likened to medicine that we take to heal our body. So amongst the antidotes, the supreme is the wisdom realizing selflessness or emptiness, because it is only this particular wisdom that can cut the very root of all our suffering, cut the very root of our ignorance from which all our afflictions arise. So there is no other remedy as powerful as this. And amongst all the many excellent spiritual teachers who have appeared in our world over millennia, none have identified that the very root cause of all our suffering and its particular antidote, the wisdom realizing selflessness. So therefore, this is the supreme remedy to heal our afflictions, to heal all our suffering. There is no other remedy like the wisdom realizing selflessness. Returning to the text, in the 56th verse of the second chapter, then intentionally not acting in accordance with the advice of that omniscient physician, which can remove all pain and sorrow entirely, is extremely stupid and contemptible.
rang la kanga shen la kanga ra shin ni ga la kanga nyong go di gi yung go re se ne di zo di re so ra de di da di me ba so le ya so da an member ma so na kha ba cho do gyu bu su re la ne de la member tham je kin se de la se de ne ge nga zo ne nyom mo be ne Geshe Thubten so ba me ba so ye de la me member so na kha ba su re se member se de ane demba san yum den de se ore members that chodo gyuba member chodo gyuba that diles chodo gyuba san demba san yum den de se de la members.
So what afflicts us so are ignorance, anger, attachment, and the other various destructive emotions that as soon as they arise, they destroy any mental peace or happiness that we're experiencing. And not only do they cause us to suffer immediately, but they lead us to engage in non-virtue and thereby accumulate causes for suffering in the future. And through expressing our afflictions through our speech or behavior, we harm others too. So who is it that it's presented this that this is the cause of our suffering most clearly, as well as the antidotes to remedy, to heal one? That is the supreme physician, the omniscient physician, Buddha Shakyamuni. So in the English translation, it's in the second line. The Tibetan starts with the omniscient physician, and this refers to Buddha Shakyamuni.
And then member de Geshe Thubten and the choto cuba has imbigate that Yumzer Masona Tamji Kempas or Tamji Kempas to do. That ne Yomomba de Geselia and the Yomomba Yimba da the Gui Yimba and the Dunga Tamji Jungim Jungu Yimba de Sanyi Kingores. Chizan di Meva Suegi Tablam Yamling Rimba de Sanyi Kingores. Chizan Sanyegi and then 지게 뇨모베 리다 디 녀보 빠지리 탐제 상게 라니게 냠는제 냠용을 토네 켐바 탈켐바 뇨모바 사보나 제바 뻥바 뻥베 윤된 탈켐바다 근데 최 탐지기 캠비게 아직 켐바 탈켐바레 지자다 디네자 상예기 디네게 냠르기 림바 떼야야 토관베바 띵 두고레스 지산 가르가르 띵거 창세기 상이 캠바 뒤다 남바군도 캠바레스 지산 디네자다 초도 규바 임비 김전로제 계시를 마서나 상이 연된디 다 뇽모 동화세기 멤버 초도 규바레라와 임비 김전 가레라는 초도 규바인데 뇽모 방자 가르가림바데 탐제상이 캠바레 디 녀보 가르가르 띵거바데 대야상이 킹고레 냠용을 돈에 캠바레 지사다 데니기 상예기 데니 녀보도 검제 녀모바 사본데 뻥바다제 뻥베 연데 토바레 최대 최탐정원숨 도바디 마캠바세야지 가요 마차상 캠바레 제사상이디 캠비게 탐제 캠바레 세드 다 제사 멤버 초도 규바 안에 상예 좀낸 탐제 캠바 디리해야지 돈나디 숨고로 받아.
Buddha Shakyamuni is praised here as omniscient. And having this quality of omniscience means that he knows all phenomena. There's nothing that is not perfectly or completely or entirely known by an enlightened being such as Buddha Shakyamuni. Therefore, his wisdom is completely flawless. There is no part of his knowledge or wisdom that is lacking. There is no fault or anything hidden to his wisdom. This therefore means that he knows entirely the various causes that lead to the suffering of beings. And moreover, he knows perfectly the various stages by which suffering beings need to cultivate their mind so as to abandon the causes of their suffering completely, entirely. And he's able to guide beings perfectly because he has trained in this way himself, attaining the state of omniscience, the perfected state, where all good qualities have been fully and perfectly developed. So therefore, he is a completely reliable guide based on his own faultless experience.
Sungu tamche jimba ye sede da sungu la de nganzu nyomo begi aneji wonke nganzu lule ya nasu ne nazara nasu denegi aneji ke cho dunga nyoya de dunga de ke siguro da nyomo denegi nyomo onge ye dunga sungu nyomo jebu sungu da andige gyu nyomo ba ye gyu tamche ane jimba ye sede an san ye ge di lamdönje ne meba sugo resa nganzu jimba sede meba sugo de chisan meba sugo resa.
The second line in the Tibetan is our third line, which can remove all pain and sorrow entirely. So pain and sorrow is a result that comes about in dependence on causes, and the causes specifically are our various afflictions, such as ignorance, anger, attachment, jealousy, and pride. These are what cause us pain and sorrow. And the Buddha can guide us so that we can remove all pain and sorrow entirely.
And zungu dati nyumo be tiki jimba meba sugore siti ta meba sudana kane sugore labdu dangan zuki nyama gasa jigo adona sanyo jimnan diki tupnam dipa chu mi zhushin tupnam dipa chu mi zhushin dipa chu tu ma sen ane zhuyo dunga chagi misela niji toba shanla pumende chungi dimba dimba zhuwa yu sashi jezan sanyi ge sunye ji gasa dipa meba sudana kane sugore labna jezan da sanyi na chagi sen seya tuya yo mare ane ngazu dipa kasore chu chuba na juishin meba suya yo mare ta kharsen an tablam khariyor sane sanyi gi ngazu ya disu nyomo bare de chare di khongro re di nyom mari bare sen pha ngoche che digi nyembo de da gomgo de di gomgo re di gombo re dene gomgo re se nyamle rimba ji ma ngazu ma 땡그레 치르와 지난 냠는 림바 마 랍제 갑투스 냠는 림바 떼네 디가 저기 냠솔레어도 아니가 저기 냠모 바디기 바 메바스 고레스 빵고레스 다 짐바스 빵바스 셴메바스 고레스 제자 산지기 간젤레 땅아 저기 동화연 여규 냠모 바디 메바스 탑람디기 바디 안 탑람디 산지 땜바 나신 제가 저기 냠솔레 냠는 제어도 아니 아 저기 되샤샤다 디모디기 바 지름베림데 메바차 사보나 제바 아니 메바차 해도 아니 아 저기 코에 동화 타달리 저와리 제자가 주기라 동화에 녀모바디바 메바스 빵고래 제래.
So how can the omniscient physician Buddha Shakyamuni remove all pain and sorrow entirely? Well, he actually said this explicitly himself in a particular sutra quotation. I cannot remove your suffering with. I cannot wash away your non-virtue with water. I cannot remove your suffering with my hands. I cannot bestow my excellent qualities upon you. The only way I can help is by teaching and you striving to liberate yourself. So in particular, in that final line, Buddha Shakyamuni pointed out how he helps beings. He cannot help us with his hands or through some magical means. How he can and does help is by teaching, by guiding. But then what's also required is on the side of the recipient of the guidance, is to apply themselves to the guidance. So the Buddha has identified the causes of our suffering, our various afflictions. And then secondly, he's identified their respective antidotes. And thirdly, how for us to cultivate those antidotes within ourselves so as to gain freedom from those afflictions. So it's through ourselves, applying ourselves to the Buddha's teachings, cultivating them within, that we will remove all pain and sorrow entirely. We ourselves will remove all our pain and sorrow entirely by applying ourselves to the Buddha's teachings, by cultivating them within our own minds.
Ta kadar miji semba ni se kadar miji se da chesan kadar se do sanje yi tablam nyomo bo pangwi ge tablam ka na wa re se ro da ka sun wa re se de ka ta ka de ka se ne nyomo bo nyam pongbi ge nyem bo nyam le gi rimba di pa sun wa was sun yo res ina ya da ngana ju gi da de ngana ju ko wa pa du slung jang ngana ju ina da de di men bi ge da nya wa da yi da dun ro ne de gen de su sem jen cha san ro wa da ngana ju kar ma je ba re se ne sanji then dunga nyomo pangbi lam nyamli rimba temba na shin jang jugi nyamlen jeo males nyamle maje ba inza nga jugi ne ka so de khurbe dunga la taja tarba tamji bu ko ba to modu ba di du shin la ba re sa ka dar mi ji sa de.
The third line in the Tibetan is the first and part of the second line in English, then intentionally not acting in accordance with that advice. So that advice refers to the various teachings of the Buddha, where he identifies the specific our sufferings in the wide breadth of varieties and their causes, namely their afflictions, but also what to do about that, the antidotes that we should cultivate and how to do so. So this is the advice or the variety of teachings that the Buddha has given. But whilst over lifetimes we have applied ourselves to them to a certain extent, hence we have created the causes for this precious human rebirth, we still remain bound in the suffering realms of samsara, still always in danger of falling into the lower realms. So therefore, what is lacking is our full and wholehearted application of the Buddha's teachings, our striving to cultivate them within and radically thereby radically transforming our minds. This is still what is left for us to do.
And the Jinga Yala Sobada, and the Niki, that Yomo chose Samlodi, the Niki Patan, Azuki, Indigenana, and Azuki, the Niki Samlatan, some of the Kingi, and another Liang Ambassadine, Nasolakia, Nyawalakia Sobada, and the Niki, Dungan Yong, Ganga Cheho, the Chego Res, Chesada, Katar Misha, Sembani, Sayi, Yamin, but Yomo, Nyembo. Nyamlin Gomshu said in Azuki Magombache, di Dokshoda, Nyomobadi, by Laglen, Yamsuch, Carson, Bijit Danjin, Manzulia, and Dusine, and Tivasago Rege, di Wangedan Savanza, di Wangedan Azuki, Koale, Tarmatravach, Laba, the Dinish Ladu, Resach, Sungaroda.
Not acting in accordance with the Buddha's teachings, what we find is we've continued to act in accordance with our habitual tendencies, our habituation to afflictions, such as anger, jealousy, pride, attachment, ignorance, and so forth. And it's through this habituation to our afflictions that we continue to create causes that lead to all our suffering experiences, all the pain and misery that we experience. And it's through our habituation, our ongoing habituation to the afflictions, that we remain bound in samsara. And it's these very afflictions that actually bind us to our own samsaric experience. So rather than cultivate to a degree of sufficient strength the antidotes to the afflictions and have those dominate our mind, still the afflictions are what we are most habituated to.
And then Sanji Yamlam Yimba Tembana Majeba Tito Cho the Nyomo, some Dushan to Chepa de Carrella, another Timuk, Shindu Timuk, maybe yes, the Shindu Timuk, Sidanga, Shindu, Lembarush, Lemba, Sidanga to give Di Nyomo by Re, Tenga the Dungayan Good Nyomo by Reda, Di Nyambo Diri, said Pangjadang, Nyamsulegi. She landed the Palang Rimba the machine button, say Lembasura, Chidane, Chico machine badella, and Milembarisha said Lembasura, and the Copen Lagaro said Zemoraka. Lemba Minu the Nila the Shindu said the Nila Gord, says Lemba said Shindu said Shindu Lembare said Carson Nanzuke D. Sanji Nyomo, but Nyembo Gomos and Mahomba, Nyomo, but Jim Major said, Lalan Tower, the Karchevare Lana. And the Panglangi needs with the Hamor, machine body, Lembaru, Lembares. Says that machine was and Timugi, two machine will move by Timugi Padusian, machine body. Says a machine by the D. Jinjin and Nyomoba, Deja Controla Soba Nyomoba, Chipachig Lalenta, Tene Sanji, Nimbotian Gom said the Magumba, Daddy, Manzuki, Panglangi needs to machine by Timugu on the Chebares or that and that.
The fourth line is extremely stupid and contemptible. So my translation is somewhat stronger than how Geshe is presenting it. So what I've translated as extremely stupid, we should rather understand that it to mean that despite having knowledge over what is causing us to suffer and what we can do about it, our ignorant confusion is still so strong that it is as if we do not know. So what this means is our knowledge still remains largely intellectual and is not yet integrated within us so that we do with ease turn away from our afflictions. So therefore, even though we have some knowledge, we are still acting as if we are confused, acting as if we have not really heard the precious teachings, because they do not yet fully guide us.
That is only Sanji Jimdi Jisumba Nashing, to get the Winnie Sura, Denish Chadu, to do some down the Rabba, Haku, 2 years, Shirwada, the nearest and then to Karchi or Sene, Chike, Pachu, Chiki, so between Baledu. Di Sungup chair, Rang, Sungup chair, and Pajo delia, Chiki, never in that, Sosugi, Sungup the Yabuchagi, some Kogorwa, Corona and the Conrola, Condro di Bejetan, Conrolane, and Di Condro Wangi, Pajolia, and the Chik, Siktu, Jaya, La Sobata, and the Chik, Shanley, never year, La Sobata, Unity, Chisanga to Condro, Garson, Sosugi, Sungup chair, Sosu Penny, Gangadi, say, Dondalia, and Condrel Bejetan, Bejetangor, Chesati, Bejeta. Diminition, Condro Bejetan, Digi, Dugajmado, Yajungo, Chesati, Dimashin by Kinstan to Condro some da. Aji, Yulia, Chapa Wongi, Chapa, Denigi, Chatan Wongi, Rangi, Chola, Chapa, Benarangi, Guanella, Chapa, Rangi, Wanchilla, Chapa, Yen, and the chick, Shalia, Dunga, Gangatea, Shen, and chick, Gangatea, Mangush Yungo, but then this one to get Tonchus, but Chesan, Dinigi, Sanjegi, Jeba, Sadi, Majevache, then Maje Sadi, Mazuke to Shadi, to swing to do Shin sometime. Chesan Condro, Chada, La Soba, the Bejeta, the Karichin Bizan Orson, Chesan got Dene Bizta by Di Julia, Rashi Nicola, Dunga, Ganga, by the Queen, by the Hamawache, quite Bejetane. Chicken actually Kevsan review about some time, Yaga in be some target, and the Digi Bangba in 매바 쇠빵바 있는 디빵고에 바데 하모와 디기 도초다 지길 랑신니가라 강아세게 탑람 아니 디 도초 샹랴 잠바단 제바단 수줌라요 송고고래 디마송바 인자 마송바 제네 제반자디 아니 저기 노트리 차바와 디제 디마신 바데 가서는 방랑에 예수의 마신 바에 전 디저 와서 디마신 바데 가서 디무 대제 디무 디기 지고레스 마신 바코로
This really is how things are in reality for us. We've heard these teachings, but they are not yet what guide us in terms of how we habitually respond to situations. We still respond in a way that we have for countless lifetimes. For example, we respond to certain situations with frustration or annoyance or even anger, thinking that this is what will protect ourselves. By standing up and being strong in the face of others, we think that with this mind of anger, I protect myself. Whereas we would have come to hear many times in the teachings that anger only serves to harm. It completely subdues our intelligence, prevents us from thinking clearly, and prevents us from being able to skillfully resolve situations that are beneficial in a way that's beneficial for all involved. So we've heard this many times, yet our habitual response remains one of anger. And so too in terms of when attachment arises, we habitually follow our desires, thinking that this will lead to happiness. That by fulfilling this desire and that desire, finally happiness will come. Even though all too often to fulfill our desires, this comes at the expense of others. So we've heard about the faults of attachment many times, yet our habituation remains to the afflictions, and we continue to be guided by these minds that have let us down so many times. So when we look very honestly at ourselves, we can see that whilst we may not have this intentional thought process, but this is how we act. We act like someone who believes, intentionally believes, that anger will protect me, that by following my desires, happiness will come, despite all the evidence to the contrary. And likewise, despite all the teachings we've received on topics such as ethical restraint, generosity, patience, and so forth, we still are as if unconvinced by these, because these are not what spontaneously guide us. These do not yet dictate our spontaneous response to situations. So this we need to recognize. We need to recognize to the extent that this is how we still find ourselves.
Timu Shindu Timu maybe said down that Lenigi Namye Shema Shempa Lemba down and the Timu Nyomo but Timu Tenzin that Timu Maripe Onkere said just a Denigi Lenye Namye much Shema Shempa Lemba Sada Lemba Kuba Ruch my Lemba Roche. Just another the Kaba Marwa, the Lenin Nami Chesina Kabache, Legan Nami Chemashiba, Lembaruch, the Anne Timugi has a Mashiba Maribe Ongi, Chingtube, Kansate, and Delia, and Meba, Chida Meba, Lana, the Joes of Rwada, Joes, Pabe Kansa, Nami Delia, Ninji or Esor, Ninji, you, Denegi, because to Gedi, Nami, Lenin number Shema Shimba. Aniji Lemba, the Aniji Timugium, Maribe, Wangita, the Negi, the Shada, Controla, Soba, the Nyom, Bedusin, Jenny, and Jatugan, and Simjan, the Negi, Delia, and the public answer dictated to let me be Ninji or Eshe, then Shindu said, Ninji or Eshe, Odus, Tambodus.
So this again in this fourth line, again is using much gentler language than I've used in my translation. So because of this lack of knowledge about the afflictions and the harm they cause, and their antidotes and how to really cultivate them within. And this not knowing, even if one knows intellectually, because it's not yet deeply integrated, we're not yet deeply habituated to it, it is as if this is all still unknown to us. And this then is our situation of deep confusion, or which is a gentler translation than extremely stupid. And being in this situation, now that final word, contemptible, being in this situation means we are an object of compassion for the great beings. They look at us with pity, that despite having come to hear the teachings of the Dharma, to accept these teachings, we still are not yet applying ourselves deeply to them. We have not yet deeply integrated them within ourselves. And in this way, we are an object of compassion to the great beings.
Maybe maybe Kewa chima ina nga son kewa dunga dili te yungor chesan dipe mas dugja nga so mogoya dir dima meba su gugore sen pawe gasa de ge be chik be nga so mason dug na shin chi be ti 통고 re chesan papa nam ge di khenjen maybe ne re se de dade denigi lenye number shema jen timu yue de gen gasa de la ni chi ge gasa da di gi Geshe Thubten Rabten maybe ne be dit mebare me dugjare di rashiniga ne di panmadoware di mogoyare di meba sugure said that maybe ne said Geshe Thubten musum plesior di maybe ne pabenam gi dele be mebares meba nigur di panmadoware rana mogore shala migore di meba sugure be dugjare said Pabe delia maybe nechigore, maybe nere, di gule tempe gansa tegelia, nijiki gore sajino. Ondusine, maybe ne saidi, gansa koron membache, gansa di yiki, Geshe Thubten Timusum di, then maybe nere, the bedushare said, then maybe nesa delgoche.
The way to relate to this final line is, so I'll change the translation. So instead of extremely stupid, due to this, to our lack of knowledge. And again, we may have intellectual knowledge, but it's not yet integrated. So our lack of integrating, due to our lack of integrating knowledge, is for the first part. And the second part, that which is contemptible, this refers to the afflictions. The afflictions are what should be held in contempt, what should be looked down on. Afflictions such as anger, ignorance, jealousy, pride, these are what should be held in contempt. And here, we should be very clear that when the afflictions arise, or to the extent they dominate us, we should not self-identify with afflictions. We are not those afflictions. We are almost certainly likely to have the habituation to self-identify with the affliction, seeing ourselves as angry or desirous or proud. But we are not those afflictions. When Arya beings view us, they do not view us in that way at all. When they view us, at these suffering beings, they view us with compassion. They hold their afflictions in contempt because they recognize it's due to a being's habituation to the afflictions, they struggle to transform their minds. But what should be blamed is the afflictions, not the struggling being. Hence, as ordinary beings, we are the objects of compassion for the great beings, for the Aryas.
Tadi ngā zuki jiso ki nāla la ngā zuki mebe ne se rwa to be ngā zu mi chasan ki o be midi dukja resha an midi be jik shan liya chawa je mi kanga te be dukja resha san mi kola ya kyun mebe ne se kola kyun da je ko kyun da ko no be dukja resha san se du ngā zu jiyong ki jiso ki mi ki ta mebe ne se rwa be ne kontrol sobo da jik be shan liya chawa 차와 쉬우지게 콘도 원게 차단게 원게 현리아 차와제 현이 꼭소를 현리아 강한되게 미딜에 되네 저기 지소나라 미코라 메바지고 마도 그 녀모나 가사에 예와 지고 말 미디 빼둑자래샤스 미디 그 뭐야래샤스 제제 그 미디레 냐바 땅고도 세지 콜리아 통주대 가지고 메베네 차고로와 저기 지소가 삼다 다 파베 가사 디기 가사다 디예와 체 녀모번 예와 체제 가사들라 라호요 말레스 닝제 고 녀모 되차시데 디무스미 샤마도 소바데 제사 디네자 가사들라 닝제 셈베 닝제 좀 닝제기야다 아니 니 가사 디기 라호메 버 샤마도 땅켄 되차시다 디무스보데 디둑자레스 델레 메베네스 제사다 저기 신도 디무 메베네세들이야 메베네 삼데 다데 파바남기 메베네 가슨 되샤시다 디모숨데 메바체 델야 간사다 기규레가 간사다랑 아니 녀모바 예와체제 간사들레 닌제다 미고 녀모베다 샤마도 라와미니 닌제스 닌제 삼다다 아니 간사들레 메바마제바 베둑자르샤 간사도 둑자레 말아바체 간사들레 닌시 다 디규에 녀모바들야 베둑자레 다디 메바수고레 사지 녀모바 둑숨들레 메바다 파베 가사남기 나라주게 다디 샤와도 녀모바들레 삼르기네 마다제 미코라 삼다 미디 둑자레샤 미디레 메바 나주게 베 둑자르디 마라레샤 디 메바수고스비 메바다고라 제산디 제자 메베네사 삼단하들야 나라주기 메베네 삼단하지나 파베 가사는 이 메바 네세 삼단하인 되스 카가라 차사라와
There is a vast difference between the way us people in society view each other and the way Arya beings view us. So in society, there'll be people that we'll ridicule, that we'll hold in contempt, saying that this person is an angry person, this is a proud person, this is an arrogant person. And we'll hold people in contempt, ridiculing them, because we identify them with their afflictions. Because we see someone as being habituated to say anger, we say that person is angry. This is the normal way of thinking in society, but it is completely mistaken. The way Arya beings see the same person, let's say it is a person who is greatly habituated to anger, we will look at that person as an angry person. But an Arya being will look at them and recognize that this person is enslaved to their anger. This person is continuously suffering by their deep habituation to anger. This person is bound to their anger. They have no freedom. They do not choose to respond to stimuli with rage. This is their habituation. They have no freedom. They have no choice in the situation. And therefore, Aryas see this person as being deluded, in that their delusions overwhelm them, or they see the person as afflicted because their afflictions overwhelm them so. And in this way, they recognize ordinary beings as confused, as deluded, as ignorant, due to their afflictions. And if the Arya beings hold anything in contempt, it is these afflictions. But the way they relate to our suffering beings, as being enslaved by our afflictions, as being controlled by our masters, their afflictions. And therefore, they only view beings with compassion.
라신 니가를 동안 용거에 강한테 유디 가르스네 가르레스네 되샤시다 디목선 요모바데레스 디 메바스에기 엔타 메바스에알이야 아니디 탑람 등에디 덤바상여 줌네디 다 탐제 캠바 멤버 초도기가 덤바상여 줌네디레 제사 덤바상여 줌네디기 디 요모바 밤베 니보 탑람 땡샤바디 나주기 안델이야 안지게 가소레 냠는 제고레스 냠는 제고레스 디제바이나 하는 저기 도시네 그 가서래 동하기 규용하여 규 냠뭐 도스는 매바스요르고래 총총총을 매바스요르 되네 총나이도 매바스요도 디제보 안 동하 용하야 되게 매바차기레스 강아디에서 두고레스 도나니 보디스 거다.
The very essence then of what Shantideva is presenting in this verse is that every instance of pain or sorrow or misery that we experience is due to our afflictions. It's only these afflictions. And the supreme physician, the omniscient physician who can heal all beings is Buddha Shakyamuni. But he cannot do the work for us. All he can do is present to us what we need to do and how to do it. The other half of the equation then is for ourselves to adopt to take up what we are offered in terms of knowledge and strive in integrating that so it becomes our very way of thinking. So that we don't fall into the mistake of gathering immense knowledge over years of receiving teachings, but we integrate that so it becomes who we are, that the teachings of the Dharma start to influence our very way of thinking. And by engaging in this process of hearing teachings and reflecting on them, meditating on them repeatedly over a sustained period, with this combination of repetition and effort, we will come to notice our afflictions weakening. They will ripen less often, they won't last as long, and they'll have less strength as well, as we become ever more skilled and habituated to wholesome, virtuous ways of thinking.
군 차사세 윤단 탐제 빵바래 제사 상기기 두시는 주기야 데르 지 람데지 교부리 선비게다 상기기 윤된 전제 상계랴 안 캡수죠 캡수죠 교부리 선비 캡수죠 데네 캡수죠인데 상기게 냐 그치 녀몬 빠에게 람림바 냠는 때마 나싱이 냠는 지긴 선비디 디린 수는 게 냠는 지긴다 선비게 당은 주기 두시네 남자는 무슨 남자 케넨로 제제나 데네게 아주 냠르제 고주고 그래 제고래 해야지 제 삼다에다 도나님 보디샤고로 받아.
Furthermore, we must remember that whilst Buddha Shakyamuni is rightly referred to as the omniscient physician, he wasn't always such. In a very distant life, he was once an ordinary person no different from any of us. Perhaps sitting in a room not that different from this, hearing teachings, and independent on his prior accumulation of causes, just like we've come here with our own accumulation of causes. The teachings arose within him. He went for refuge to the teacher and teachings to the Buddha of that time and the Buddha's teachings, and committed to strive precisely in accordance with the teachings that he was receiving. And in this way, he started to cultivate the paths of the Dharma within, that eventually led him to become an omniscient being. Now we come to the 57th verse. If along a small and ordinary ledge I need to proceed with care, how much more so when astride an enduring precipice that drops to a depth of 1,000 leagues.
안지게 제 타말세다 타말베 양 충충 대딘 마사베나 강바자다 라바자다 수부도 나스다야마도 아니 지 개와치망아 손조에스 가시 두고 말바 가브레는 아주 미기 탑시 로봇이야 된 투여 되게 자고로와 제사 양사 타말바세 데네 충우라 데네게 양 람가라 양람 충충 주요베나 양 대라양 아주기 pen 바위네 발차가나 파수 조디pen 베 samloda sabsabchine ngi simphal odin ma done yang yorda din ma saye nga yorda samjin delya ani bayu jeje sim namyang ga 제가 samma ji bayu denjin zhugudu wa so tama yasa chuala bayu ne par jagwe nas.
This verse then, Shantideva is presenting reasons why we must apply ourselves to cultivate the teachings within ourselves right now. So in the first line, if along a small and ordinary ledge, so we can think of perhaps when we climbing a ladder. When we climb a ladder, as we see then in the second line, we proceed with care. We go up the ladder just to make sure that it stays stable and we don't fall off. But in reality, if that were to happen, the worst that would happen probably is we get a few bruises, nothing more. Yet we still proceed with care.
제사딘 마사나 강아 튀겨 봐서 delya 사섭치오다 디난 지버와 양나 생아주 모던 파타도데 람갈야 지 모자다 지지 다가서 비치 삽자치데 바위띠네 땅국으로 봐 제사다 지게 샤라도 라신반데 데니기 바위띠게 전시 메디 디겐진 다비알라 소바다 양레네 데니게 사야서 삼로다 마라다지 데 람갈 삼마다지 직선의 초지를 파 삼다지 조데 데네 남에 파스조도 아니 바위띠 전시 메딘 바인자 아니 야 마사야다 모라다야데 냥아용에디 용고로와 제자디 바헤팅 고래 사지 어두시네 다 바헤팅 수데 전시신된 고로와 당죠.
And just like when you drive your car along a very familiar route, you know where you're going, but nevertheless you take some care. At the very least, you don't have a drink or two before leaving out, before heading out. You do at least be a little careful. So this word care, it's usually translated as conscientiousness. And here the meaning is conscientiousness, but we should include the two partners to conscientiousness as well, and that is mindfulness and vigilant introspection. So when the verse says, I need to proceed with conscientiousness, mindfulness, and vigilant introspection.
디나신다 박세 동도 루아이 윤링 양서 메지고스 데 박세 동시 당은 저게 반에 체를 마선에 균 타른 무슈르 삼당 거를 제가 디네서 당은 저게 제와 치마가 솔마 동야 안에 지게 양을 마선에 디레다 딘마 나솔 동야다 디네게 제 동야데 나솔 마동야데 양제 양을 마스 제가 델 마동하나 안에 박세 동도 루아이 윤링 제도 윤링보에 배는 안선을게 된줄게 봐나 냐와다 이달게 봐나 되네게 봐나 아직 디텔이야 게주르비고 고급 뇽뇽이 깔래 하보로 봐 데렌사 델레텔이야 되샤 샤다 디몽 뇽모바든 기고로 디겐진 안마지 안에야도 안직두시네 디바 몽보사진 되네야 안직 된줄이야 타르 갖고 쉬우지어로 인자다 봐 양사 윤링 양사 홍화이스 제자 델이야 홍야 델이야 가르친 홍루고래 쓰든 가르신 룽고를 라도 대자 되샤 디바사바나 룽고레시로 디비옹에 된 마도 가선 깨디 디비옹도 제자 당한도 가르 바이팅 거서는 디비기 유 녀모바데 파 델야 바이팅제 딕숭교 가고레서 녀모바기 마주 컨트롤라서바데 되샤라서바데 데니게 원기 직두시네 잘야 녀바다 차와제기 디 삼로티기 파가고레스 제자 바이팅고 디 바이팅스 젬바데 시신 땡제 디가고레스 디 마가바이나 안 마야살 홍로 제자 디네자 나 바세 동도 홍와이 윤리야서 뭐지고 인지민지다 델레데 가고 바이팅제 디 가고데 인지민지 가고 임바로 와서 계천보시고 가고레스 인지민지 가고레스 대자 가고야데 가르스 바이데 가르가고레스네 바이든 전시신 땡제 되샤당 홍로 나야라 소바 녀모바 제데 바가고레스 제자디 디가샤바네 디바사게 말 디바사게 말와스 데자 레사게 말디는 간솔레 기 말해서 나디스 모레
Then the third and fourth lines, how much more so when astride an enduring precipice that drops to a depth of 1,000 leagues. So this refers to the position that we find ourselves in, which is that at death we may well drop or fall into the lower realms. And if we were to fall into the lower realms, which is presented here poetically as dropping to a depth of 1,000 leagues, if we were to fall into the lower realms, we would have to remain there for an immense period of time. So that's meant by what's translated as enduring. Enduring and the word depth, these both relate to the long period of time that one has to remain in the lower realms, has to remain as an animal or a spirit or being in hell, because once there, it is so difficult to accumulate virtue being the causes to be reborn once again into the higher realms. So what is the reason that one drops or falls into the lower realms? It is because of the existence still of non-virtuous karmic imprints on our continuum that are ripened by the afflictions. So those karmic imprints have been accumulated or created under the power of the afflictions, and then they are later ripened by afflictions. So therefore, it is imperative that we refrain from afflictions. We do all we can not to be under their influence while striving to eradicate them entirely. And this expression, how much more so, that we've come across this or other iterations of it many times. It implies the meaning that we must make great effort because this is something so obvious. So in this particular context, we should strive to abandon the afflictions because not only do they cause us to suffer now, but they may lead to a disastrous result of one falling into the lower realms.
Bendigo Nyawada Ida Dunro said Bendigo Korake Yudi Karachigorsina, Chesa Dosha Shetan Timunyo Mobati Chigores, Chesa Jesuki doing Anzi Dipasiadi Sa Liang Le Sadi Wangi Tanganzuki and the Chiki Nasol Maji Dunganyo di Chagores, Dungal Malungju at the Lungores, Chesa Nyomo Badires. Di Mabas a Bangu Hores. The Bangu Tablam the Su King good Timpares, Sanyu Jimlen to get Tablam Densha, Tablam Densha, Chesa Sanyu Jimlen to get Tabla, Sanyu Jimlen Korongi, and Yama Com Yamlen Yamsulene, Banto, Gula Gije, and Yamlen Tarshine, and the Chig in Aranzulia, Ninji Wangi, Ze Wangi Aranzulia, the Nico Com Yamlen Jimbati Sunsha Yores, Chesa Dinganzuki, Jen Shishin, Bahu Denje. 인지메주 공고그레스 이 공고그레스 데네 나솔레 마기야다 동안 마기야 단달라 인지메주 공고그레스 그래서네 아주 양서 충충질 마사르그 삼제 안지 파주 조대가 섭섭진 조후두와스 마사르는 나스당가 강나 체기제 삼제 데네 마사르는 섭섭치기두와스 디나시 지상한소다 데네기 예바이나 데네기 동아 빠던 거 용어 저 강한 치고 지상 강한디原来 규디 녀몽바 치고 지상 녀몽바디 바기야리야 까고래 송고래 상이 좀는 그 손샤바 나신 지상아주 도시는 냠는 제고래 사지 또 내님버디 송고다.
The essence of what Shantideva is advising us in this verse is that rebirth in the lower realms as an animal or a spirit or as a being in hell comes about in dependence primarily on our afflictions such as ignorance, anger and attachment, because it's through the arisal of these afflictions in our mind that we accumulate non-virtuous karma. And the karmic imprints are placed on our continuum, and later afflictions again ripen such an imprint, and they may well propel rebirth into the suffering lower realms. So for these reasons then, we have to make effort to abandon our afflictions. And as Buddha Shakyamuni, motivated by compassion and his omniscient wisdom, that he taught us the complete and unmistaken method by which we can abandon our afflictions and thereby gain lasting happiness, freedom from all forms of suffering and pain. And to be able to live in accordance with the teachings that we have received, to live in accordance with the Dharma, we need to rely on close friends of conscientiousness, mindfulness, and vigilant introspection. It's through relying on these three at all times that we are able to proceed through our day with care. And in this way, we can ensure that we do not commit any downfalls, accumulate any non-virtue, and so forth. So therefore, we need to rely on conscientiousness, mindfulness, and vigilant introspection.
Showe ne samdabe ne showe chia la ne dang ju ke dine ke ta ke di ne ga ju nyam len ji dang bo de lia an ji ke dunga de ke sam la da ja no da ga ju ke mili ne an ji ke dunga pa so de ne ke da an di ji ke an ji ke chulo da de ne ke da ma chu da de ne da ba ji da ji ke lumba shan da ga ga de ne tuwa san be ke ga ga di yung duwa sa ga ga di che samda an de la da mili ke ba ne me ma dunro samdan dile kanga che ta nyawa da dunro de nga zu thwa yo ba dunga kanga de ye kar kar yo ba nga zu thung yo thwa yo ro ba ta nyawa da ida se de ge ta nga zu thung go ma ta disule sang je da de ne ge do da tian jun na ma song xie be ge yin za ta de le kanga che ba do me ba yong re se je sa dunga di je sa di dunga di ge yong ko re je sa de ne yin za da ta dine ke dunga de nganzo so so ile na ma ho re rang la shen la ku go ma ro che sa ra shen chang ma la go ya de ga san di gi ku go re de ma mo ho de dunga la ku go ma ine da nganzo ge du sam dai de di gi go ya de ma ra che ka dunga chi ya da dunga de ku go ma dunga de ra go re san zo lia che dine za da sem jan tham je lia da rang da rang shen be ge sem jan tham je da di gi ku go ba che san di gi de jung go du san be ge da du shen de sam da chi dang bo nga zo di gi chi jung go da rang shen cha ma la di gi ju na san be ge sam la da de nga zo ge du shen de shu gen du shen de sam la da dene that is di sam da se we che le ya and so so ge di gi ju na san be ge sam da di sam da de di gi go bi gyum chen ro je na so so ge gang chen tu tu gyum chen ka ze sam da de dang chen ne dang tu tu sam da ne di gi ju na san be ge sem ja tham je le di gi ju wa sho san be ge de dene sam da ko me de de jam ba ko ba che ge ro wa jam ba ko ba che ge ro wa 진짜 다 이내다 semja 탐질로 둥하 고고 말이야 둥하데 마세나 디기 하여 말was 제가 둥하데 가서 고고 말 둥하데 용도 제가 되네 해서다 둥하딜 마세는 탑미도 제가 semja 탐질 둥하데네 되네 용도 왔으면 강아디 파 삼다지 다 강아딜레데 세고도 제가 semja 탐질 둥하단 자고도 자와쇼 선비게 삼다이도 아주 도시 니제 그 삼다데 다 삼다단 림바 도시 자다이로와 나도 신은 이번 숨바데다 가서 다 semja 탐질 둥하단 자고도 다 semja 둥하단 세고도 다 둥하 영화에 가르스 용거래시도 다 대시 준준날 송바 나신 아 저기 동화 영화에 녀몬 발레드네 요 되샤 콘도 가야레드니 이거 진짜 동화 영화 유대 차상하다 아 저기 교 녀몬 발레드네 용도 와 진짜 다 되네 진행한 삼다베네 콘도 개베네 아니 소소리아 냠용 돈에 소소리 콘도 개베네 니 이긴기 라라 마기바 샹라 마기바 요 바딩 저기 냠용도 줍투고 봐 근데 이제 도신 진짜 콘도 왕기 세대래 이나야 라신이가랴 콘도술이 개베이네 미지해 미딜에 콘콜라 기보메 바샹라 기보메 라신 마기바디 콘도 지치기도 사자 야 되샤见见见呢딱 되샤见되샤 왕기 아니 라하 마기바 샹라 마기바 되샤의 슈처처도 되샤디 왕기见见 아니 콘도기야 되샤 왕기 나자기야 안 되샤 왕기 차도기야 근데 녀모버리 망부지 강아지산 되샤야 되네 기기도 왔음베 다 디수차자한테 가르치는 연구라선 디모텐제 마신바 마릭바 델레티네 예우도 왔으면 두신의 삼단에 제산 동화 영향이 규디 동화 섬전한테 동화다 자고도 삼단에도 동화다 간에서 자고 삼도 동화 영향이 규디 삼다 제산 다디 용한 동화 영향이 규디 파매바 소와라 섬전 탐절에 편바 주고도 제산 섬전 탐지기 동화된 게 세고도 지도 다 섬전 탐절에 동화 영향이 균형만 받으면 매바 소고도 다디 가르쳐 소거라나 and the Sanji Sumbana Jinga to Lakwe Dunje, and the Chu June Meba Sueme, Dunga de Yanga to Lakwe Lenjine Sueme, and the Sosu Ganshi Yundin, the consul pa, Deji Dunga Meba Sueme. Na Garjoson, Sosugi pa, Gangshin Consulia, Tablam de Sanji Sumbana, Consulia, and Dunga se Condromaje, Lam Yamlan Karkar Gumbo, Tablam de Denje, passe words. As I didn't say, Simjan Tamje, Dunga da Java, Digi Jude, Meji Sempegeta. Dushin some died, Rimba somebody dushin, some died, Yamlin Cheches, they did dushin, some died, or go by comedy.
How then to train our mind so that in the teachings that the Buddha has taught? Well, if you meditate, for example, in the morning, then when you get up, immediately turn your mind towards what you'll be meditating on. And then, when you sit down, reflect first on suffering. Reflect on suffering in many different ways. In particular, on the suffering that you experience, either are experiencing or have experienced. Both physical pain as well as emotional pain. And here the texts present various different ways to look at the suffering that one oneself experiences. Then in addition, call to mind the suffering that others are experiencing. Think of others in society, as well as those that you elsewhere in the world, whose suffering you can recognize through what you see in the news, for example. And see the wide variety of ways that humans suffer. And remind yourself in each and every instance that particular instance of suffering has come about independent on causes that have been created. Then after suffering, reflecting on your own suffering and the suffering of other humans, then reflect on the suffering of animals, as well as unseen beings, whose suffering is so much worse than what even humans can experience. Having reflected then on suffering and the wide breadth of suffering to try and lead to a sense of disenchantment, one then calls to mind that all of these experiences of suffering are unwanted. No one wants this. Everyone wants the same thing. We want to abide in happiness with a mind that's at peace. No one wants to be overwhelmed by misery and pain. Yet, beings keep experiencing unwanted circumstances again and again. In this reflection, it's important to recall your own lived experience, as well as then what you observe, especially those times when suffering has seemed to overwhelm one. And recognize that all beings want to be free of suffering, just like you do. That whilst we can observe a wide variety of differences between beings, these are only superficial. At a fundamental level, we are all the same in wanting happiness, a state completely freed of suffering. And having thought about suffering like this, and how all beings are in pain, naturally, now the second step, the wish will arise within one. May all beings, myself and all beings, be free of suffering. May we all live and abide in lasting, stable happiness. And here you can generate now, the second step is generate the thought. May all beings abide in happiness. May all beings' minds always be at ease, at peace, no matter what they encounter. May beings only relate to each other with love and gentleness and care. And generate this deep wish within you that all beings abide in such a state. And there's not time to go into it now, but here, in dependence on the other teachings you received, use reasons to reflect on, to cultivate love within yourself. Reasons why all beings should abide in happiness, how they can do so. And then, in this same second part of the meditation, the first was on suffering, the second now starts with the wish, may all beings have happiness. This then is followed by the recognition that for beings to abide in happiness, they have to gain freedom from suffering. Because if suffering arises, happiness is always lost. Even if that suffering is slight, happiness is lost. Here generate the wish, may we all be free from suffering and its causes. And in the same way as before, use various reasons to cultivate deep compassion, wanting beings to eradicate the causes that would lead to suffering, and thereby gain freedom from it. Thereafter, still in the second bit of the meditation, having reflected or generated love and then compassion, the third part of the second step is to remind oneself why beings suffer, why I suffer, why others are suffering. And it really comes down to the afflictions. To the degree that the mind is afflicted, a being is suffering. To the degree that the mind is afflicted, non-virtuous karma, the causes for future suffering, is going to be accumulated. For example, when one is angry, because this is the easiest one to see, when a being is angry, that being is suffering. No one is angry and says, I'm having a fantastic day. No one comes home and says, and answers the question, how was your day? And said, it was fantastic. I got so angry. My blood was boiling. My eyes were bulging. No one experiences happiness in this way. We see the harm anger does to oneself. But we also know from experience, when anger is expressed, the harm it causes to others too. Attachment we need to here reflect on more clearly, because attachment is a mind that deceives us so, thinking if we just achieve what we yearn for, happiness will come. But what happens is happiness is always thwarted. And in fact, other afflictions are very likely to follow from attachment. Pride follows from attachment, jealousy follows from attachment, anger follows from attachment, competitiveness follows from attachment. We need to recognize that our afflictions are always to be avoided. They're always faulty and are never to be justified. So how can we gain freedom from the afflictions? Well, as in the verse from the Buddha, no one can do the work for us. Our suffering, our afflictions cannot be washed away. No one can remove them with their hands. No one can grant us freedom from the afflictions. We have to strive to cultivate the various virtuous mental paths within. This is the only way to gain freedom. So here now, in the third and final step of the meditation, the first was a deep reflection on suffering. The second then is moving beyond ourselves and our reflection on suffering to may all beings, ourselves included, all beings have happiness, so we generate love. May all beings be freed of suffering, so we generate compassion. And we then look at the causes of why we continue to suffer the afflictions. Now in the final step, we commit ourselves to striving to cultivate all virtuous minds within ourselves, such as love, compassion, and the wisdom, understanding reality. We commit ourselves to doing so that we can act as an emissary of the Buddha in being someone who's developing themselves and thereby can have a positive influence of the others, at the very least not to harm others, but ideally, when we develop sufficiently, to also guide others skillfully. So in the third level, the third step of the meditation, we generate the determination to radically develop the Dharma within so that we can be of ever more benefit to others. And just like the Buddha teaches and guides us, so that we too can teach and guide others.
Dine zadangi simje tamjigi di YouTube dunga se dingi jigin konsolya tablam tenjingi jigin sambe semshu kiyodu tade laksan namda sigro de dinige samlo de ningdop chembo kiyodu tadu samda odang halya deji heding halal gar singdu singmen dang hal singmen wa de sosugi chasan anji kyen azulya rangya nyomo tusum yobare cheza nyomo tusum kyena kyendi wange enshale pembo 야부축tuk마래 지나다 셴려 지다와시네 대게 탑람 대야 차상하나 신고마 마신 바이든 게션레 된투사 말에 지자디 신견의 수요래서네 다 상계래 초도 규바 탑람 약쇼의 상계마도요 말이죠. 최 탐제 간지 때와 대게 대나다 대게 람 차상 상계 긴고래서 지자다 상계래 gyuen tamje mebare za nyomo tu sum basha da cheba pang sawa yin za gyuen namya mebare chida da shen ne juwa lia tunjin chasang yoba tunjin yin juba la gyuen gi bashe tamje se sawa yin za da sangye la pa mindu sembe da tu chi de deni samda de sangye lia sangye da sangye gi chue lia japsu de be jamzhuo cha li go de jamde gong chu sum na jamzhuo sam lo li go de lia du samda dine inza dushina samda dine inza dange sanje gopa shengi pando ruwele ya dange sanje gopa matopne tab minu sembe dine samda ne semje tamjegi dunu sanje gopa tobar jegi se tobar sho sembe samda dangan jashu sem gomba ase chegorwa.
Talk a little further then on the third step of the motivation, where one is developing this strength of mind, this courageous attitude that I will help others, I will be a guide for others. This is the altruistic attitude of universal responsibility. And with this arising within us, the deep and sincere wish to be a positive influence on the lives of others, we also need to be realistic that right now, this is merely an aspiration. That's all it is. Because right now, the afflictions are still so strong within us, they're still so dominant within us. We ourselves are confused and deluded, not really knowing how best to act skillfully, and therefore are not yet suited to be a guide to others. But we make a determination. I will become a Buddha, and I will strive from this moment forth to become a Buddha, and all that I will do from this moment on, they will create causes for me to become a Buddha, a perfect guide, someone whose mind is completely freed of all faults and therefore all good qualities are perfectly developed, and thereby can give ideal guidance to beings precisely in accordance with their own karmic dispositions and spiritual backgrounds. So as this determination arises within one, you may well find your mind naturally going for refuge, with a deep and abiding trust in the three jewels arising, as well as, of course, with this determination to become a Buddha for the sake of others, generating bodhicitta. So here in the third step of the meditation, one generates bodhicitta.
Dinege zada nge semja tamje sanyo goba toba jigi sem de za dinege samda ja da dinege sanyo goba tobi chedo nge lunga yisum yo kone shala nyube chawa jigi me sempege da susu rang ge gesho kar tube ne nge semja tamje sanyo goba tobi chedo ani geba di tuki sembe samda ge kar chebe na du sine gesho tube ya cha su gesho tube ya che ne kuno janju sembe kune la je dine zada gesho tube chewe che la tamadlia dangan jigi 다 디링아 랑게 계사 사체베게와 탐제 안게와디게 셈제 탐제교 돈달에 산조고보 뉴도스비 귤규와 쇼세하다 이게와 딜라디네 셈제 탐제 동아디게세 아니 디기 푼손소바 아니 뉴도 토브 토토비 귤규와 쇼스 내가와야지 운도시네 최고로 디네자다 운도시네 안주이 지게 대주주 나라 소야 대상이 좀는데 요 손샤바디길이야 녀모베 니보띠엔 곰 냠는 제거래서 하디 도시는 아주 도르두시 삼다만 도시는 삼다한데 지 삼다 제반데 냠는 제데 셈리아 대시띠엔 곰야디 마도디 제 메시지요 말하다 디 곰야디로와.
As one concludes with the determination that I'll take care of my mind, relying on conscientiousness, mindfulness, and vigilant introspection, ensuring that my mind is not overwhelmed by the afflictions, and thereby I can sincerely commit to doing no harm to others. And wherever I can help others, wherever this opportunity to be of benefit to others arises, I will embrace it, and I will help others. I'll ease their suffering. And I'll do so directly whenever I can, and indirectly at all times through cultivating wholesome qualities within myself. So in this way, we commit to becoming a Buddha for the sake of others. We then dedicate all the virtue that we've accumulated to becoming a Buddha for the sake of others. We dedicate all the virtue that we've accumulated in our meditation to ease the suffering of all beings. And this here then is the summary presentation, is the essence of all the Buddha's teachings, and is the very meaning of Shantideva's text that we've been looking at all year. This text engaging in the Bodhisattva's way of life.
Bautumeba Sayorvade bene Geshe Chimbigi, Denigi Yamlin Jeg, Donald Sunshabading, Dus in the Chigore, Chesa Denisa, Severimichi, Choso, Lamesheda, Severimichi, Choso Zuvadia, Denigi and the Chin, Donda Jeg, Dondala, Zubare, Song Zubarwa, Denisa, Chasangi, Lalin Daje, Dusine, Jigubaza, the Lama Tunyagi. Gyue Chegore, and Yasishivala Chimbada, Sanjeda, Janju Samba Chasangi, and to Shedelia, and then Tunya, the Jesuira Chedi, or to Chegore, Dineza, Anjine, Sosora, some Daja, Denegi Chair, Bemas, Goha Yapo Chunson, that Denegi, Mutiche, Yamlen, Jigin, and Begadan, Jesuira, Rangi Kewala, Jesuira Cheche, to Skawa Comiade, Yechema Chagore, Dineza, Rashe, Keronze, and Aria, change the Kyorozle, Kalkansan Pingore, Narale Pingore, Chesana Chasan, Denigi Kishur, Chevadi, Yahochun Sampeda, Lama Tunyeva Junior, Sanjeta, Jasemba, Tunyeva Junior, Susodi, Chevel Bay, Yahochun Shah, Sembegata, Jesuina Chiada, and Mauban and Mutuche, the Yamchi to Bachikin, Sembegata, Kawakumia, Chiki Tumbakia. And then they see Shubanashing on the Nilia to see the some dana to see Shubanashing, gone to Ched, to share the Geshe.
Now this is the end of our final class, Wednesday night class for the year. So we come now to dedicate all the merit that we have accumulated over this year. So I want to emphasize here how important it is to rejoice. Rejoice that we have spent an entire year with Shantideva's text, both in coming every week to hear these teachings, as well as in your own meditations. You've been abiding with the meaning of Shantideva's remarkable words all year. And this is certainly something to rejoice in. Moreover, our founder teachers, Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, would take such great delight in suffering beings using their remarkable precious human rebirth in a way to spend an entire year with nearly 2 chapters of Shantideva's remarkable text. And we can also have confidence that all our endeavors here, in both in receiving the teachings and cultivating them within, are fulfilling the wishes of all the holy beings. And that through our endeavors, throughout the world, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are generating great joy in our endeavors, seeing suffering beings trying to turn their minds around, trying to strengthen their habituation to wholesome, virtuous ways of thinking. This brings great joy to the minds of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So therefore, like them, we too should take joy in our own endeavors and the endeavors of each other, that we've, the time and the energy that we've put in over the year to hear teachings and to cultivate them within. And certainly from my side, I want to express my appreciation to all of you, because for me to have the opportunity to share what I know of this remarkable text, for me to have this opportunity comes about in dependence on many causes. Foremost amongst them is that you are here to receive those teachings. So I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. And also we can call to mind the entire lineage of remarkable beings from Buddhist Shakyamuni to today, whose endeavors have ensured that the Dharma stays alive in our world through being present in the minds of beings. And then lastly, we commit to continuing in our endeavors, that when this class closes for tonight, that is not at the end of our journey, that we continue to cultivate the meaning of these teachings within tonight, tomorrow, and continuously. Then hopefully next year we all rejoin and regather and continue our exploration of this beautiful book.
차상 최소기 제 최년간 차상게 약요도 튕겨 제발에 되는 것도 두시는 용거래 되네자 차상이야 안배 야고셔서 투시해서 지다 안지가 라바 기요래 안에 투시해서 기요 투시 차상 투시해서 주야래 지자되네자 배 야고래 된제세 찍찍리 된에 주고래 마음배네 양아 차상 다른 나시 차상 툴람제 안 tum보야 오체 안 찍찍리야 찍찍지로 찍경아저 된지 땜배 토네 안지 야게 다야랴 아주 무디시 두시네 차상에 계셔 냠는지라고 고브라베디 온두시네 몰람 주야레 지자다 되네 담아된 아주 개와다데 빠도메 바사요레 지자 개와디라 되네 저게 zemlyong kunliya ane chige nemu chukzu tamche shije ane shide yongwa da an semjen tamche ane dunga tadan chaje sanje koba nyurdo tibu gyurgyuwa sho sayachina ane nga zu gewa tela tene ane nga zu subaramiche da yansi nyurdo chuenche ane dushine nga zu chasanda yansi zane chushyage gogabrayage 어도시는 뭐람 지교교 와셔 세징어 두시는 뭐람 대래 안디 마제당 주게다 야그럼 지게 쳔비게다 라마 지게 줄로 리스마치 비게다 네 산이게 최냠는 나게데 팬버 주권 된진 기보가 차상의 구치 땜바다 안지팅 기보 교교 와셔 세지 안다 더듯이 두시는 내디거와
For us to come together, it's come about in dependence on so many causes and conditions. The sum I've mentioned already, that there is a teacher and that there are students. These are essential causes. But so too, all the staff, both those who work full-time, those who work on a voluntary basis. Through your endeavors, those who are here now and have been present, working all here, as well as those over previous generations that have been part of the previous causes that have led the center to still being alive and functioning. All of you have made this possible. So particularly mention the few roles that I know, in particular our remarkable director, SBC, as well as our Gompa keeper and translator, and also all the others whose role I do not know, but there are many people who are involved behind the scenes who make things happen here. And because of all your endeavors, as well as the students being present and so forth, we've created so much virtue, and we can dedicate to, so that these causes continue to ripen and flourish, and that therefore we can continue to gather together again. And I also want to particularly point out the harmony that largely dominates in our community, and how this is something of such importance. And it's through the community abiding in harmony that we will be able to come together with ever more ease. Then moreover, when we dedicate, just as mentioned in brief, dedicate so that peace abides in the hearts of all beings, so that all conflict in the world, whether within families or between communities or between nations, that this comes to an end, that all beings abide in inner peace and in harmony between each other. And also we dedicate that Lama Zopa's reincarnation is quickly recognized, and also that His Holiness and all the other great beings that benefit the world so, that they continue to abide stably in our world. Then thank you very much.